The presidents on Mount Rushmore are not nearly as infallible and wholly good as we view them to be. They've been literally immortalized in stone. They've been immortalized on the side of a mountain. We need to see the fact that lots of them did a lot of bad. A lot more bad than any of us would like to admit. I'm going to start with Washington, of course. Are we going left or right? Start with Washington, then Jefferson, and end with Theodore and Lincoln. First of all, Washington. I will admit, this is the one I probably know the least about. But when it comes to his good, he was honestly among the four, as well ignorance. I don't know as much about him. He does seem like one of the better ones, surprisingly. He started the nation. He put in place the 8-year limit, basically. Well, they didn't expressly put it in legislation, but him doing that set precedent, where all future presidents would just end at 8 years. And it continued for a century and a half, until World War II, and then they had to actually force it. He did do a lot of good, but yet again, his bad. He owned a lot of slaves. He owned over 100 slaves. He did free, but he could have ended it. Him and the other founding fathers could have very well ended slavery right then and there. In 1776, they could have been like, nah, slavery's done. We're ending it right now. And the next one also could have. Jefferson could have ended it. He's the one that wrote the Declaration of Independence. He almost doubled the size of the United States with the Louisiana Purchase. He did do some good. His inventive mind was also almost unparalleled. His inventions, he was very inventive. But again, with slaves, that's going to be a very common issue with all these presidents. It's slaves. It's their viewing on black people. If you're a white person and don't care about any other peoples, you'd honestly say they're all pretty good. But if you're not white, especially if you're black, you're going to hate them all. He owned slaves. He owned a lot. And he had a lot of kids with his slaves. Sally Hemings was a woman who he had a lot of kids with. He had 6 kids with her. And never even freed to free her when he died. He never freed her. She was 14 when she started to have his kids. 14. He was in his 40s. He spoke a lot about slavery being bad. How it was a quote-unquote hideous blot. He didn't do anything about it. He also was there at the very start of the nation. He also could have ended slavery if he chose to. He didn't. He didn't just not end it. He actively participated in one of the worst parts of it, which was the rapings. He actively raped a lot. He did this to this one woman especially a lot. I've even heard how she was kept in a specific room privately so that he could just use her whenever he wanted. Washington and Jefferson both deserve to have an asterisk next to the name because they did start the nation. They did a lot of good, but they were incredibly racist and evil with the treatment of black people. And the next two were much different. Roosevelt, yes, he did start national parks. He preserved them at least. He enacted these things to keep them. He also, from some of the readings I've done, he seemed as though he was a decent person. I've heard other accounts saying that he wasn't. That he was honestly kind of a dick. But from what I've at least learned, he did actually seem like a genuinely kind of like good person. He seemed like somewhat of a progressive person. He was the first president to have ever let openly a black man eat in the White House, especially with others. He invited Booker T. Washington to eat with him, his wife, and his children. This did not go well for him. People hated him for this, but he still did it. He did this openly. He didn't try to hide it at all. But he was still very racist. You could make the argument for him and thinking that, oh, they were good for the time, but does that really matter? You're still bad. You still did bad. You still did things that are very clearly not good. He saw black people as beneath him. He didn't think that they should be so low as being slaves or property, but he thought that they were less than him. He still thought they're not people, really. They're not people, essentially. And, you're not going to think so, but he did actually help with slavery. In about 1903, 1906, he pardoned John W. Pace, as well as another massive slaver. I believe it was Fletcher Turner. He pardoned both of them, who were slavers in the 20th century, who I've been talking about. He could have actually ended slavery again. Again, there was a president who had the option of ending slavery, and they chose not to. All 3 of them, the ones I've talked about so far, could have ended slavery. They could have taken steps to actually end it. But Roosevelt, he set precedent that these people can't be convicted for the slavery they were enacting onto others. So yes, he did do some good, but he supported slavery because when it came down to it, all he cared about was money. All anyone cares about is money. And the money The money was with the slavery. And now, for the fourth one, for the one most cherished by everyone, Abraham Lincoln. We think he ended slavery. We say Lincoln is this amazing abolitionist god, but he was not. He wasn't even really an abolitionist. Well, he was an abolition. Here's the thing that people need to understand. He was anti-slavery, but that does not mean he was pro-black. There's a big difference. He saw slavery as just something so abhorrently evil that it shouldn't exist. But he didn't see black people as equal. Him and Theodore, honestly, in my eyes, very similar. They were both progressive for the time, but way over-exaggerating the goodness. And they both could have ended slavery, but did not. He wasn't... What I mean by he didn't end it is that he did make a proclamation that yes, if you're a slave, you're free. But he didn't add anything that says if you are caught owning people in slavery, you are now in trouble. It was a very weird gray area. It was like, yes, you're free, but if someone re-enslaves you, there's nothing we can do about it because there's no legislation stopping it. He didn't add anything making it illegal, as well as appointing an extremely bad, extremely racist vice president who was roughly quoting saying how there's a country for white men, so by God, it'll be a government for white men. He appointed a racist Confederate Southerner as his vice president because he didn't think, maybe me, who an abolitionist who supposedly ended slavery, would have a lot of enemies, you know? Him and no one else in the Republican Party thought about that. So we all suffered. Well, black people suffered, essentially. These last two, they're supposed to be progressives, very good with their racial views, but they were not. They're over-exaggerated goods. The first two could have stopped slavery in its inception. But these last two, they either only did the facade of ending slavery or actively decided, I'm going to turn a blind eye to slavery. All four of these presidents participated actively in keeping slavery around as an institution. All of them. Each and every one of them. A great source for learning about how Theodore Roosevelt did this would be the book Slavery by Another Name, and as well as the PBS documentary. It details how it persisted past Roosevelt and also how it proceeded past Lincoln. Now, I'm not trying to say that they're all evil. Yes, they were likely bad people, but no one is all good or all bad. We just need to take them off this pedestal. We've literally immortalized them in stone. But we need to realize we need to just look critically and we need to put an asterisk next to each and every one of their names.